Yeah, so excited to dive in. We'll do some really introductory Solidity basics. So for those of you who have already been working in it, feel free to chime in and let us know your favorite tools. And excited to get to know everybody. So agenda, most basically, is going to be the anatomy of a smart contract. For the purposes of this talk, we're going to talk about Ethereum specifically, but of course, Ethereum's not the only way to write a smart contract. That's just the one we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about forking and versioning and why this is really, really, really important in Web3. For those of you who build in Web2, I'm sure you're very familiar also, but we're going to talk about some of the risks that are involved with Web3 programming specifically. And then we're going to talk about GitHub best practices, IDE best practices, whatever tool you're using to push your code, testing and DevOps resources. Is anyone in DevOps? Does anyone do DevOps now? Okay, awesome. And then some cautionary tales. We won't spend too long on the ghost stories, but just important to know what's at stake. To start with, Gitcoin, for those of you who know us, we create solutions that empower communities to fund and protect what matters. So in practice, this means that we provide matching funds to pre-seed projects. So very early projects, almost comically early. So we work with ETH infrastructure, open source. We run climate rounds pretty consistently. So anyone who's working in a green energy or carbon neutral space. And we also run a lot of partner rounds. We just recently worked with Phantom. We've worked with UNICEF, which is a global NGO. And the important part of what we do is that we use quadratic funding in order to make sure that what is getting matching funds is the thing that the community is most excited about. So for example, if I have 5 Hong Kong dollars to give, or if I have 25 Hong Kong dollars to give, we're going to take the square root sum of all of those gifts so that the whales are sort of equating to the people who can just give $5. So what this means in practice is that the people who have the most grassroots energy are going to get the most funding, as opposed to traditional funding models or later stage Series A models where it might be a small group of people giving the most funding and making the most decisions. So it's more democratic, and what we've realized at Gitcoin is that we're able to really get those projects and those hackers like yourselves super, super early who are building really cool things in this space. So we actually started back in 2017. It was founded with the goal of supporting the developer and open source communities, especially those in Ethereum, but really all of those communities. And it was really with the mind of new monetization strategies for open source. And we used bounties, we had a lot of hackathons, and we just got really, really lucky to have made a bunch of connections with people who were early on in this space. Since then, Gitcoin Grants Program distributed $50 million in total to date. We're about to launch another round soon. So $50 million so far has gone through our program, and our market cap of all of our projects is estimated to be about $28.2 billion. So of all of the projects who have received Gitcoin funding, it's a pretty good return on investment. A lot of them do go on to work with people like Foresight. They go on to work with traditional VCs. And launch their product after they go through the Gitcoin program. I would really, really encourage everyone here, if you have any projects, we would love to see you for this upcoming grants round. We would love to have you in there, especially with the earlier stuff. We're no longer working with what we formerly did was C grants, and so we're launched instead Gitcoin Grant Stack. This means that anybody can run their own quadratic funding formula at any time to distribute funds how they would like. It makes it easier to launch and manage and grow around, so more and more people can distribute funds, grassroots, like we do. We will also today take a look at one of our smart contracts, so you'll get to look at that. Beta rounds are upcoming, the important April 25th. We would love to have you all come support, see what other cool projects are out there. If you want to submit your own project, April 12th to 21st, you can do that. And just mention, we'll have a little box there, and you can mention that you were part of the Foresight Hacker House. We'll be really excited to see what projects this team is working on. So those open on Wednesday of this week. April 22nd, everyone's going to know whether or not you've been invited to be a grantee for the round. So these are just some chatter around Twitter. Joanna likes to throw up This is just sort of giving you some background in how our community is talking about Gitcoin, the things you might see. Regen is a common word meaning regenerative. Gitcoin is really prioritizing regenerative communities, meaning you build, and then you get funding, and then you might want to fund new projects, and that cycle just really continues. We really believe that funding grassroots projects and giving back to our communities and our builders is an eternal process. It just keeps going and keeps getting better for everyone. So if you want to scan, you can scan there for more information if it's useful. Also, I'll be around after this. Please get in touch. But we hope you guys will all apply for the grants round on Wednesday when it opens. My colleague Joanna is going to be here on Friday to remind you, and we would love to see the projects you guys are hacking on. Know if everyone's got that shot. Good, good? Okay. All right, so what is a smart contract, and where can we find one? Has anyone, you're already working in Solidity, someone back there is already working in Solidity. Can anyone give me a definition of smart contract? Anything that you've worked with? I've got a really easy one. So basically a smart contract is going to be a program which is on-chain, any blockchain, which executes if certain criteria are true. So it's essentially an if-then statement, which I'm sure everyone in this crowd is very comfortable with programming. So we're going to say, if these things are true, if I have enough balance in my Ethereum wallet, and if this person has signed a contract to receive from me, then we will send funds to them. So very simple, if-then. They can get more complicated than that, but at its most basic, a smart contract is just a program executing on-chain when certain criteria are met. So we're going to come out of here and actually look at some resources too to make this real. All right. So Solidity is the language we're going to be talking about today. Again, we're talking about Ethereum specifically. If you hear about smart contracts on other chains, if you hear about other programmatic blockchain languages, it might not be Solidity. We're going to talk about it because it is something that right now the most builders are working with. If you work with smart contracts, you're probably working with Solidity. And that is because Ethereum's foundational technology is that you can execute these composable contracts on chain. You can have a contract within a contract within a contract. So it can get complicated from there. But Solidity documentation is here. I would super encourage everyone to look it over when you have time. And again, I can provide these resources after. We're going to look at the most basic Solidity application. So here's an example. And if it sounded scary with the contracts within the contracts, it doesn't have to be. It can be very straightforward. So this is just a very simple counting function. And I'm sure even without Solidity background, it's an object-oriented language. This is going to make pretty good sense. I can give everyone a second to look. But in effect, I'm sure you all have written these hello world, these very basic programs in the past. Nothing insane here. We are looking to see these functions. We're looking for very basic features in this particular contract, so nothing too scary. This should look pretty good to everybody, I'd bet. We do have these commented out messages. We're going to talk a little bit more about why that's so important later, but having these comments within the contract to let you know what it's actually doing, obviously a best practice in normal Web 2 programming, but it's extremely important in Web 3 because, as we'll see, there's a lot of security risks when it comes to smart contracts, and it should be very apparent for anyone who wants to audit your contract that they can see exactly what it is that you're doing, see it in natural language, and then see the function. And if this function doesn't do what you say it's going to do, that's going to trigger some security red flags. That's going to be pretty scary. Because it is a smart contract, it is programmatic, it will happen once it is launched on chain if the criteria are met. We can have a broken contract, which sends money into the ether, never to be back again. And we can also have a malicious contract, which is going to do something that it doesn't purport to do. So malicious contracts are often going to execute in a way where it looks like, okay, normal contract, no problem. But if you dig into the functions, it does something that you didn't expect it to do. So in all things with blockchain, the thing that we're really excited about with this technology is that it's public and transparent. So if you don't have these little indicators of transparency, if something's not performing the way that it seems like it should perform, this is going to be a huge red flag. So this is going to be a huge red flag. So we're going to talk about security best practices today. I work in fraud mitigation. I work in trust and reputation at Gitcoin. I have seen some contracts go bad. Previously to Gitcoin, I was at Coinbase and did fraud and payments risk there. So I will just say, this is a beautiful, simple contract. We like this. It's going to count how many transactions go through it. That sounds perfect. It can get more complicated, and it can get easy to break the code. So it's very important that we're all checking each other's work, and we're using blockchain for what it was intended for, which is public, transparent programs. So we're going to look at a little bit of a more complicated one. We're actually going to look at Gitcoin's own contract. So what this is here is our contract for the climate round, or actually, I think this is the open source round. So this was a recent grants round that we ran, our alpha round, so our test round of a new protocol, which is executing quadratic formula on chain. So what is happening is that people are putting money into the contract, which they want to go to their favorite grants. So let's say that you built a grant that is going to be an open source contract which checks other contracts. Let's say that's what it does. You can put in that, and it shows you the check, and it shows you the results on chain. So if you built that program, maybe a lot of people are excited about it. They want to give you some money. So each time they give you money that's coming into our contract, they're articulating which project wallet you have. And so all of this is documented on chain so that we can match it and we can reward you for that community funding. So if we come over here, everyone's familiar with Etherscan, I hope, maybe? This is a tool I spend a ton of time in. I love Etherscan. It's parsed the blockchain really well and nicely. It has these clickable links so you can really get in and understand. It's also labeled. Etherscan works with a lot of people in the environment, so they label the contracts and they'll label information. So it's just a really lovely tool to start getting oriented. So if we come here to look at the contract, we can actually see, because it's public and transparent, we can see exactly what this contract does. So this is our contract for the quadratic funding grants round. You can see we're importing some libraries up here. And again, best practice, we've got some comments going on so that anyone can understand what different chunks of the code are doing. So this is a really clean contract to make sure that anyone knows what it is that's going to happen when you donate money through the Gitcoin contract wallet. We've got 300 lines. We've got 300 lines of code. I would recommend digging into as many contracts as you can get your hands on. Just get really familiar and start looking through them and see if you can understand functionally what the different pieces are doing. So here we have invoked by voter to cast votes. Again, we're doing quadratic funding. So this is taking in the money and accounting for each of those votes that each individual wallet does. All right, so again, just so everyone knows where to find that, we're looking up the contract wallet itself. This is the blockchain address where this contract lives. And when you're looking at a contract wallet in Etherscan, you could always come over here and click contract. And that way you can see the code. You can also copy and paste that code. Go put it in your own IDE like we'll talk about and start playing around with it. So, any questions so far? Is all this sounding good? All this sounding fun? Yeah? Cool. All right, so forking and versioning. I'm going to say some stuff that I think most of you already know, just to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to Web3. So a fork is going to be a direct copy of existing code, like I said. You can take that contract we just looked at, you can fork it, and you can go start to work on it and make it your own, make changes. So you're copying the code, and it's with the intention that you're going to make your own edits on top of it. And again, I'm sure most of you use these words and have done this in Web 2, but to reiterate, a version is what we're calling each change in code over time. So each edit creates a new version of the same code. I'm sure this is familiar to you. And then a branch is going to be one pathway in the code. This may or may not be like the master branch or the main branch. I, for example, might work on my branch, do some testing, make sure it works before I merge it into the main branch, which is deployed. So one pathway in the code, it may or may not be the master or main branch and the code base, which is in production. But each branch might have its own versions. So maybe I'm working on a version over here. I've got a couple versions while I edit it. And you, meanwhile, maybe Lulu's working on her own branch, and she's got a few versions of that branch. So when we're going to deploy that code, we want to reconcile and make sure that both of our versions match, and we're going to merge them into the main branch. Everyone's probably familiar with some of these practices. The reason that it matters so much in Web3 is really because we are making programs which will execute no matter what. If it is true, then they will execute. So if Lulu's working on her code and I accidentally broke it, I broke her code, and we merged my version instead of hers, we're going to have a broken contract. So if money goes in and the logic isn't quite right, we could end up burning that money, or it gets stuck inside of that wallet. So there's been a lot of cases of this. There's been some pretty high-profile examples of multiple millions of money going missing. So with Web3, just even more than Web2, check, check, check. Label your versions. Write your notes when you're committing. Oof, my computer doesn't want to keep showing us this. Thank you. Does everyone already work with versions of code, versioning, work with that best practice? Awesome. So we work in GitHub at Gitcoin. That's where I worked also with Coinbase. It's a pretty great tool. I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with it. And the reason it's such a cool tool is because obviously you have that browser record. You can access it from anywhere. I can push, my +1 from my phone. Just an awesome, useful tool. Working solo, if you're going to hack on Solidity contracts by yourself, make sure you're putting comments in there, even for yourself. I know I forget what I meant to do. So just always put comments in, even if you think it's obvious what you're doing. And I like to call this sanity checks. We call this a lot in data. Like if you think you know what your total count of data entries is going to be, just check that count in 2 different ways. Do the same math twice. Make sure that it's as expected. Thing you can, just do a little sanity check and make sure you're getting the results you expect to get. Name your versions and describe what you're trying to fix. Super, super important. I know I've made a version of something and it's actually more broken than the previous one. So make sure that we know what we're trying to fix so we don't get too lost in there. And track your sources. So tracking your sources is super important, especially if you're going to grab other Solidity library pieces and grab other contracts. Just remind yourself where you're getting those from. And then working on a team, if you're hacking together, same thing. Comments, comments, comments for your team members. They'll love you. They'll thank you. Protect your code base, meaning if Lulu's working on something and I'm working on something, I want to merge mine. Let's make sure that I get a +1 from her. So she just looks at it, she does the same thing, she does a sanity check, and she says, yeah, okay, this looks good, let's put it in. You can protect your code base with as many, limits as you want within Gitcoin, or within GitHub, sorry. Within Gitcoin, we do 1. So just one other person needs to look at it and say, yeah, this looks good. You can protect it with 2 +1s. It can depend based on your permissions, whatever. Super recommend that whenever working with Solidity. And then file your issues and bugs and requests all in one place to keep record. I'm sure you guys all have your own ways of doing this and your best practices, but super important. If you have a bug on a smart contract, you want to bring that smart contract offline to make sure it doesn't keep executing. Is it sleeping? Okay, thank you. Awesome. And then take advantage of the project management tools. I like that for GitHub. All of those fun things. So testing in DevOps. It sounds like nobody here is in DevOps. So let's talk about this a little bit. Does anyone know what DevOps stands for? What it means? Okay. You may be called different things in different organizations, but this is going to be developer operations. Big picture. I like to think of these folks as the people who keep me from breaking things. So DevOps practices are going to be things like testing practices. DevOps folks are going to do a lot of the infrastructure that allows us to push our code. How do we protect from breakage? We test everything, and we'll go into what an example of that looks like. So if we want to talk about how we actually do the testing with a Solidity contract, there are a few tools. I'm going to recommend this one as a library that's great to test with. This is recommended by the Ethereum Foundation. Very well vetted. Their devs are using it. Definitely great for anybody else to use. And again, I can provide these after the fact if anyone wants to grab them. But if you just look up Ethereum Foundation testing, you're going to find a lot of resources. This is specific to an IDE that we're going to go into in a little bit. But this is Remix IDE. And so this is their testing plugin, which they've written, which is very similar to the one we just looked at, honestly. So this is just going to allow you to do it within the same base that you're actually doing your code in your IDE. So you can see this is going to have more buttons, more simplicity. You don't need to execute it from terminal. This is going to be a great tool. And then this is also going to be the same group, those remix tests. This is their master library. So if you wanted to run your own test in your environment or you want to modify it for what you're working with, would recommend digging into this library, especially if you're working on a big team. So the resources are out there. Definitely would recommend testing. We've already talked about what DevOps stands for, and then how we execute a basic test. It is important to keep in mind while we have these tools, we're not doing this on-chain. We're going to test it before we push on-chain. We're going to test it in a non-live environment. So at a certain point, it is possible that you could create a new problem, and you could test it, and it passes your test, and then you push it on-chain, and it doesn't behave as expected. So we're going to do a combination of both automated tests and manual tests. So I'm going to give, I don't know if everyone has their computer, but I'm going to give everyone a second to get into Remix IDE a little bit more, if you would like to, or otherwise download it, bookmark it for later. Basically, this is going to be a tool within which, like, you know, VS, like whatever IDE you're used to using, this is going to be Solidity native IDE. So this is a great tool to download and to start playing with as you start working with Solidity. Any questions about this, or has anyone tried other tools besides Remix? For those of you who have done some Solidity, do you use Remix? Yeah? Okay. It's pretty ubiquitous, and it's nice also to be able to send it to folks back and forth. But this is what we would recommend. This is what a lot of people use. I am going to also, since we're on the topic, I will ask you guys to bookmark our friends over here at Solidity Guilds. So Zach, our head of developer relations, works really closely with Solidity Guilds. I would super recommend getting in touch with these folks, especially if you're starting out, you want that mentorship and teaching. This is a collective of people who Skillshare and who are happy to talk about best practices with Solidity contracts and talk about what they know. They are writing contracts with really specific use cases, but also can give you some context on other ways and emerging research. So tokens, of course, decentralized exchanges, of course, NFTs, and then staking and liquidity. Pool rewards, definitely an up-and-coming sort of feature. All of these things, they're going to have example contracts for you. They're going to be happy to check your work, test it, and so I'd really recommend getting involved. Also, some of the coolest projects are coming out of folks who are involved with Solidity Guilds. So this is just a few examples. So Remix and Solidity Guilds. If nothing else, I would recommend you get involved with those things. All right, so how do you actually get started? Can I hear like what languages people already are programming in, like what we're most familiar with? What do we work with? Solidity, yeah. Anything else? Anybody working with React or Python? Anybody do front-end development or data? Okay. I'm kind of Python native. I'm a data analyst at the end of the day. So I look at broken contracts and I look for malicious contracts and where the money goes, but I'm really from a data science discipline. So I'm working with Python a lot of the time. R is something that I work with. For those of you who are familiar with Python and other object-based programming languages, it's probably going to come pretty naturally. And we already discussed Remix and Solidity Guilds. So let's take a look at some example contracts to get into. This is going to be a whole library. Again, we've thrown up a couple libraries. So this is going to be a library of available resources. So for those of you who are on GitHub, pretty easy to find Open Zeppelin. You can just look that up outside of your organization to find this. I would recommend like throwing a star on it so you can find it later. But this is a great place to go to get going after you've got your Remix downloaded. We've also got a couple videos. I'm going to might play a quick video since we seem to have time. All right, so this is going to be a DeFi security summit. So folks working in the decentralized finance space discussing audits, white hats, all these things that are extremely important to our industry. White hats being those people who break things on purpose. They look for exploits, but they're doing it in order to inform the folks who are writing the contracts. It's a great way, great side hustle to do security testing. We also have some discussions on audits, a little long. Maybe we won't hop into any of these unless we have time at the end, but I would recommend looking at DeFi Security Summit if you're interested in some more of what can go wrong and what best practices are. Yeah, so ghost stories, we won't dig in too much here. Broken contracts have cost people millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. Broken contracts happen. The code doesn't execute how you think it does. Maybe you're trying to burn a little bit to prove something, but you actually burn all of the money that went in. The other thing is malicious contracts. You'll hear on Reddit, you'll hear on the internet all the time people say, do your own research, do your own research. It's very hard to do your own research. So I would really recommend that whenever you're cruising around with your own Ethereum hot wallet hooked up and you are prompted to sign something, be sure to grab that contract and then go look at it in Etherscan. Go look at it, just make sure it's what you expect it to be, and make sure also that nobody on Etherscan has reported it to be malicious or potentially harmful. People do report things to these centralized watchdog groups. So sometimes if there's a contract which is known to be executing malicious exploits, that'll already be flagged on Etherscan so that you can avoid making that same mistake that other folks have made. And similarly, if you do find, like, someone drops an NFT to you, you're like, oh, where did this come from? We're not going to, like, send that out, not going to send alt tokens out. What can happen when you send away an NFT is you can essentially trigger the smart contract to execute. So just like we say, like, this NFT, if sent, is going to send royalties to this artist, we could also say this NFT, if sent, is going to drain the wallet that it came from and send all of the funds within the wallet somewhere else. So we're going to be really careful when using our hot wallets and when cruising around and exploring new Ethereum projects. I always recommend that you have a hot wallet which does not store significant funds, is not your payroll wallet, is not your savings wallet, and you use that to connect to different websites. You use that to explore new NFT projects. I would really recommend that everyone try some of those security best practices. Does everyone have a hot wallet already or a wallet on your computer? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah? What are we using? What kind of wallets do we have in here? I use MetaMask primarily. Yeah. Coinbase launched a wallet. We've got a lot of like up and coming wallets. Has anyone heard of Magic Wallet? They're doing cool things. They're essentially trying to like help you get onboarded with just as quick as your Google OAuth. So it's kind of a Web 2 native way to do it. It's nice for a little quick spin-up wallet if you're just going to be testing some things. But lots of options. MetaMask is great. We love MetaMask. All right, so some further reading to direct everyone to. This is, again, the smart contracts testing, where we grabbed those libraries we talked about earlier, where we talked about the remix methods for testing. This is Ethereum Foundation's official documentation on how to test your smart contract. So we can just head and take a look at that. Ethereum Foundation has a bunch of super useful information. If you haven't kind of cruised around here, I recommend it. Also, the guys and girls who work at Ethereum Foundation, they're awesome. Super open door, really excited to have new builders in the space. Please never worry about going to their GitHub and like requesting, if you have a node hardware or you have something new to share, a new RPC endpoint. They're always like happy to audit, and it's really like a very open door community. I think sometimes Ethereum feels like the big leagues or something really scary, but it's a really small community in my experience, and I would encourage everyone to like get involved and really get in those Discord servers and start those conversations, because at the end of the day, we're all trying for the same thing. We want transparent, fair systems. We want really cool new smart contracts. We want new projects in this space. So I'd recommend getting involved. Another thing that I'll call attention to is that Ethereum Foundation gives away money frequently for those who are working in the Ethereum space. So just like Gitcoin gives away grants, Ethereum Foundation gives away amazing grants, and just really like keeping an eye on that. It can be your pre-seed funding before you head towards seed, before you head to Series A with a partner like Foresight. And it's a really great signal if you get some of those grants. The other things that I'm going to add to your reading list, your to-dos, if you will, Solidity by example that we talked about at the beginning. Those are going to be really simple contracts to start to wrap your head around. I would definitely start there. And then Code for RENA reports. This is going to be, if it'll let me click on it, this is going to be some examples of known exploits. So this is a great thing to keep an eye on and just be aware of. Audit reports are going to show some security vulnerabilities, and it's just sort of like a good thing to sort of, watch with your morning hot beverage, your tea, your coffee, and just like stay informed about what's happening around the space. We're all learning together. It's a very new space. Things do break and go wrong. And so these are some really trusted audit reports so that we can understand what the vulnerabilities are and so that these groups can shore up and fix those. So OpenSea, one ghost story that I'll tell here is a malicious NFT. It really wasn't anything that OpenSea did or any vulnerability that OpenSea had. But for those of you who have been on the site, you go around, you look at different NFTs, you're signing your hot wallet pretty frequently. What essentially happened is there was a MetaMask imitator that basically, it triggered your MetaMask, it triggered your hot wallet to sign a contract, and it looked just like it was OpenSea NFT. So people signed it without thinking. It just, whoop, yep, sign it. I'm looking at NFTs, I do this all the time. And what it actually was not an OpenSea contract. It was a malicious contract they picked up from somewhere else. And so it just triggered when they went to the OpenSea website. So essentially it was a fake API pop-up that triggered the hot wallet, and then people signed the malicious contract. So what OpenSea did to fix this was to really shore up their Web 2 security. So they had to make sure that API couldn't be called from within their website anymore. So some interesting stuff. A lot of it is Web 2. It's not actually Web 3 security, but we still access all of our Web 3 and our smart contracts through Web 2. So that's still a major arena for exploits. But there's some cool audits in here. So I'll throw that in for next time you're looking for some reading material. We also have an audits contest. For those of you who maybe have more of a security background or like a white hat background, would recommend getting involved in that. You can acquire bounties. You can get great funding if you're sort of already learning and you're already in the space and you start looking at other folks' contracts. So keep an eye out for those contests and other ways. And we will actually visit the registry. So smart contract weakness classifications. This is a little bit more nitty-gritty than those audits we were just talking about, but this is essentially going to explain as you get a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole what the problem is, what, in plain language was happening, code with no effects, so irrelevant code. And then this is the test cases that demonstrate this problem. So that's a great resource to start looking at as you become a little bit more familiar and comfortable. All right, and then, Certic also great resources for security. So really these last 4 are all security-based, my background, so it's always top of mind for me. But I would super recommend here Solidity by Example as a starting place to learn. The other thing that how much time do we have? Okay, we've got 10 minutes. So if you have your laptop or even if you have your phone on you, these are going to be capture the flag opportunities to start hacking on some Solidity contracts. I would recommend these first 2 more beginner, and then these last 2 are going to be a little bit more advanced. So I'll be very impressed if anybody in this group can solve these. These are sort of puzzles to get you working and thinking about what could be wrong with the smart contract. The idea is that you find the vulnerability, you capture the flag, and then you solve the puzzle. So if we come to this one, maybe try this one from OpenZeppelin. Again, a reminder, OpenZeppelin is the group that made some of our testing services that we were just discussing. All right, so we're not going to sign into my wallet on a public browser. There we go. So you're going to have to connect to it in order to play, but this is going to be one of the capture the flag examples. And it is a game, so kind of a fun way to learn. Take me a couple hours. I don't know how speedy you guys are, but definitely a great thing to do on an afternoon when you have some time and you want to start exploring Solidity contracts. Again, we've got some other players. So we've got some other networks besides Ethereum. Does anyone know the difference between a layer 1 and a layer 2? Yeah, feeling good about that? Okay, cool. So we've got some other things to play with besides just the Solidity. Well, these will be in Solidity, but besides just the Ethereum mainnet contract, essentially. And it's not going to let me poke around. But this is going to get you going and get some games going to start learning. Again, these 2 a little bit more involved. These are going to be the GitHubs. So you're actually going to have to deploy it for yourself to play. And then these 2 a little bit more fun entry level. If everyone's had a chance to take a picture or otherwise grab those, I'm happy to send around this deck afterwards too, if anyone needs it. I want to leave some time for questions because we were a little content dense, or maybe not content dense enough, I don't know. If you want to get more into the nitty gritty, happy to talk about more ghost stories. But if anyone has any questions, or those of you who are walking in a little bit late, if you have any general Solidity questions or general best practices for looking at on-chain data, that's really my area of expertise. Happy to talk about that. And again, really hope all of you will head to Gitcoin and apply for grants. Come support your favorite projects. We'll be excited to have that launched on April 25th and open for applications on April 12th. But Joanna's going to remind you all. So on Friday, we'll remind you all again. You can go apply, take your project, Ethereum project, and get some grant funding.